US President Donald Trump has ordered the US military to immediately resume testing nuclear weapons. The decision has sent shockwaves around the world. This is happening after a gap of 33 years. Trump's decision has raised many questions. To understand it better, we are joined by Heather Williams. She is the director of the Project on Nuclear Issues and a senior fellow in the Defense and Security Department at the Center for Strategic and International Studies. Thank you for joining us, Heather. I want to just dive right in and understand what Donald Trump is really up to and how many nuclear tests have there been and why were they stopped in the first place and why would anyone want to start them again?
The last U.S. nuclear test was in 1992. This was largely driven by public outcry, the environmental impacts, the humanitarian consequences associated with nuclear testing, but also there was a growing international movement to do away with nuclear testing. China conducted their last nuclear test in 1996. Russia conducted their last test in 1990. And they all signed on to the 1997 Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty. And this completely banned nuclear testing above ground, below ground. And the United States insisted that it have a zero yield threshold, meaning that any nuclear activity, any experiments could not produce any sort of yield from a critical chain reaction.
Heather, if a comprehensive test ban treaty was in place, why would the US president return to nuclear testing, that too decades later, suddenly?
The US would only return to nuclear testing if it needed to confirm the credibility of the US nuclear arsenal. So the US nuclear arsenal regularly goes through a strategic stockpile management assessment program. And what that really means is really smart scientists at the national labs are using supercomputers, lasers, and other really advanced technology to make sure that the nuclear arsenal is fit for purpose and that it will do what it's supposed to do. They can do this without any explosive testing.
Heather, it cannot only be about checking the credibility and situation of the nuclear weapons, right? What is the deeper meaning behind all of this, if you could explain? Because Russia too has been upping the game of nuclears. So is it a message or a signal coming from Donald Trump?
There's also a political aspect to this, right? If the US wanted to make a really big signal or send a really strong signal to Russia or China that it wanted to get back into nuclear competition, perhaps with new weapons designs, then it might want to return to testing for those reasons as well. However, I think it's really important to point out that when President Trump recently said that he wanted the US to immediately return to nuclear testing, it's possible that he meant the type of testing I've been talking about, which is testing of warheads, testing from the nuclear stockpile. It's also possible that he meant testing of missiles and other delivery platforms that would carry those nuclear weapons. And that type of testing is ongoing. Russia and China regularly engage in testing of intercontinental ballistic missiles. Russia just tested an underwater drone that is capable of carrying a nuclear weapon, for example, whereas the US has been doing far less testing of that type. So it could be testing of warheads. It could also be testing of the platforms that carry those warheads.
Well, we talked about Russia and China, but we cannot miss North Korea when we're talking about big nuclear powers. What role does North Korea have in Trump's this decision?
So there isn't a technical reason for the US to return to testing just in response to North Korea, but it is worth noting that both Russia and China have been testing nuclear delivery platforms over the past year. A year ago, China tested an intercontinental ballistic missile over the Pacific. And just in the past month, the Russians have tested a new nuclear-powered, nuclear-capable cruise missile that has incredibly long ranges. And they've also tested an underwater drone that could potentially carry nuclear weapons, according to Putin.
Heather, now that we know that US is going to resume nuclear testing, what will be the ripple effects of this? How will other nuclear-armed nations react to this decision?
If the United States did return to nuclear testing, then other nuclear possessors potentially could follow suit. The country that would benefit the most from a return to nuclear testing is China. The United States conducted over 1,000 nuclear tests. Russia conducted over 700. China has done less than 100 nuclear tests. And a lot of Chinese experts and officials have pointed out that China might be at a disadvantage in terms of knowledge of its arsenal and weapons designs because it just doesn't have as much testing data. And so if the taboo against nuclear testing was broken, if there was a return to more nuclear tests, China stands to gain way more from this than the United States would.
Thank you so much for joining us, Heather, on the show. The United States has clearly opened a new front with resuming nuclear testing. Russia, the US, and China are all undertaking major modernizations of their nuclear arsenals. Can this be a new nuclear escalation? Only time will tell.